This video is sponsored by Skillshare, which is a site containing thousands of classes on creative topics like animation, music production and crafts, created by masters of their field. The first 1,000 of my subscribers to click the link in the description will get a free premium membership trial. As a YouTuber, I have approached video editing in one particular way, and now armed with that knowledge, I find it even more interesting to visit guides on video editing, told by people who learned in a different way. For instance, I watched a guide on making a short film by a filmmaker called Olaf. Even though he films with real cameras, I have been able to apply his teachings to the digital world, which is where I record stuff. Skillshare makes it easy to review the credentials of the person you're watching, and it is reassuring to know that you're learning from somebody who knows what they're talking about and who has had success in their profession. That itself is inspiring. The site has a number of free classes, but for $15 a month or $99 a year, you'll be given unlimited, ad-free access to everything. Link in the video's description. What if CSGO hadn't been made? This is a question I've asked myself a number of times, since the difference this would have made to my life would have been immense. Impossible to imagine where I'd be today, really. But that's not going to stop me from trying in this video. Let's first imagine if Counter-Strike Source was still the newest game in the series. Before CSGO, Counter-Strike's player base was fragmented between CSS and the original 1.6 version. And this would probably have continued to this day, with both games retaining a small but loyal player base, much like they still do now. 1.6 still has more than 10,000 active players, while Source, the newer of the two, has just 4,000 on average, which it's remained at for the last few years. Without CSGO, I think these two games would have more active players, since none of them would have moved to CSGO. I don't think it's likely that these games would be less popular today had CSGO not been made, but then I am aware that these older games have a few popular custom modes that are still being played today, so it could be that people found Counter-Strike thanks to CSGO, but then decided to play the older games for one reason or another. So it could have gone either way, but I'm going to say that more people would still be playing on the older games if CSGO didn't exist. I'm not sure what the esports scene would look like today if this had been the case. Without a massive audience, it's hard to imagine these games ever making it to arenas. But events for Counter-Strike did exist before CSGO, though these were a lot smaller. The esports scene has grown immensely since 2012, and it's hard to imagine the older Counter-Strike still being relevant when there are so many newer titles with active communities and enthusiastic developers. Counter-Strike games would probably still make an appearance at LANs, like the Epic and Insomnia events in the UK, which are still going, or at least would have been had there not been a pandemic. There is the possibility that without CSGO, Valve would have made another newer Counter-Strike title at some point. Again, it's difficult to imagine this timeline. Had you asked me 10 years ago when CSS was going to get a sequel, I'd have said they'd have waited for Source 2. Obviously with CSGO they didn't. I think the only reason we got CSGO when we did was because Valve wanted to port Counter-Strike to consoles. They probably took a look at Counter-Strike Source, deemed it too dated to be released in 2010, and decided it would be easier just to make a whole new game instead. Funny to think that CSGO might only have existed because Valve wanted to make a console version of Counter-Strike, isn't it? But their attitude towards games has changed since CSGO was released. In fact, the whole world's has. CSGO came out 8 years after Source did. CSGO is now 9 years old, but it's hard to believe that Valve would replace it with a newer Counter-Strike game anytime soon. That would be ludicrous when CSGO is still so big and successful. It is proven that a multiplayer game can remain relevant for years, if sustained by its developers. And many similar games have followed in Counter-Strike's footsteps in this regard, building a loyal player base that hangs around for years after the game was first released. But this creates a new possibility. What if CSGO wasn't needed? What if Source, through years and years of changes, slowly became what CSGO is today? It's based on the same engine after all. You only have to play the original version of CSGO to know that it's a very different beast today. Who's to say that CSS couldn't also have lived long and prospered from an equally radical overhaul? The issue with this would be that it would upset the player base that liked how the game used to be. But then CSGO's changed a lot, and I don't hear people complaining that it isn't how it used to be when it first came out. I think Source was saved from this fate because it was neglected for so long, to the point where it was easier for them just to make a whole new game instead. But it's a cool thing to imagine. What if CSGO hadn't been made? What would that void be filled with instead? What would Hidden Path have spent 2010 to 2012 working on instead? What would Valve have done instead? And which games would CSGO's player base be playing instead? And would those games be different if CSGO hadn't existed? A lot of CSGO's features were found in Valve's other titles. Dota 2 has a matchmaking system, while Team Fortress 2 contained custom equipment, even before CSGO was released. But the success of CSGO's skins and cases cannot be overstated. They no doubt influenced similar systems to be integrated into other games within the industry. I suspect those titles would have got there in the end, but CSGO's success must have accelerated that process. Would we have seen titles like Valorant? And would they be the same had it not been for CSGO? Sadly, my expertise ends with CSGO, so I'm not even going to try and speculate about this sort of stuff. But perhaps you might like to. But I can tell you something. My life would have been very different were it not for CSGO. Some people may see this title as being just a game, but for me, it's been my hobby, my social life, and has even become my career. I was doing YouTubing before this game came out, but this channel would certainly be very different were it not for CSGO. I can even trace back to the exact moment that I moved to the game. I was working on a map, D Elysium, for a mapping competition. I was making it for Source, but about halfway through development I thought, wait, wouldn't it make more sense for it to be made for the newer game, since it seemed like a great opportunity to be one of the first people to make a map for it and to reap whatever rewards there were for having done that. I ended up winning that competition, meeting numerous people during that period of my life who I probably wouldn't have met otherwise. So if CSGO hadn't existed, it wouldn't just be another game that I'd be playing. I'd have a different group of friends and probably have done something very different with my life. I can't think of much that would have remained the same. I'd probably have moved to making more Arma 3 content on this channel for a while, before eventually moving to Rainbow Six Siege content on YouTube, had that still come out as it is. But I'm not even sure about that. No game has appealed to me as much as CSGO has, and I suspect it's because few have the mapping and modding capabilities of CSGO and the Source engine. It was the mapping that attracted me to Counter-Strike, and which encouraged my move to CSGO in the first place, after all. If this channel existed, it would have been very different, and as a result, so would 2Clicks Philip. Maybe he would never have made the videos he's done, or maybe he'd have made more of them. At that point, the butterfly effect becomes too great to imagine. But I don't think I'd have been as happy. It's thanks to CSGO that I've met or spoken to so many people in the industry who I used to idolise as a child. I spent years playing Source, and to be able to interview its mappers and to have the opportunities I've had, I wouldn't replace for the world. I've been to a lot of the real-world tournaments for the game now. I've seen the real side of Counter-Strike, and they've been some of my fondest memories of my life. I think of how incredibly unlikely this would have been had minor things been different, let alone the game it's all based around never having existed in the first place. So I personally have so much to thank CSGO in its current state for. Though the ironic thing is, had it not existed, then I'd probably think I was a better Counter-Strike player than I know I am right now.